Hello, everyone. It's kind of the end of the week. Welcome to the Daily Sib. We've obviously got the VE Day bank holiday tomorrow, so I've not booked a guest, and I'm going to give myself a longer weekend. But it's been phenomenal how well this format has been going the last 3 or so weeks. Very excited to have my good friend Cam on the show, Kamran Mallick from Disability Rights UK. So welcome, Cam.
Hi, Martin. Good to see you.
How's your day going?
Good, thank you. Especially for this, I've moved into my kitchen. Normally, I work from my bedroom, which is a bit darker.
Right.
So you're welcome to my kitchen.
Well, good to be in your kitchen and good to see you again. It's been a while since we had a bit of a catch up. I think in person was about a year ago. We did the Toyota mobility filming, didn't we?
That's right. That's right. You came down to our offices in Plexel in Stratford.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Lovely offices as well. It was really nice there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I came up to you in Cambridge as well.
I'm trying to think. We did. We've met in Cambridge a couple of times. I mean, time, as you know, time's just bloody flying at the moment.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Talking about offices, what a difference a year makes. There's a lot happened, a lot changed. So before we get into some of the COVID-19 specifics and the rest of it, it'd be great if you could just kick off with an intro, really.
Yeah. So hi everyone. Really pleased to be here, Martin. Thanks for inviting me. I've been watching some of your other ones this week, and kind of really brilliant what you're doing. So kind of well done on kind of launching this. Really pleased with how it's gone. So a little bit about me. So I've been with Disability Rights UK. I joined in middle of 2017, July 2017. Prior to that, I was chief exec of a local disabled people's user-led organisation in Hammersmith and Fulham, so West London. I remember I went there for 3 years, stayed for 13, just because there's just always so much. Yeah, there was so much to do, and it's kind of never ending. But it was really the greatest thing about it was meeting just local people, disabled people, and kind of engaging and understanding how our lives are affected by all sorts of things. So I was there for 13 years. A big part of that organization was around youth work, around young disabled people. We ran a very large youth program that was really all about giving disabled people opportunity to socialize, interact, learn those kind of skills, but also what the pathway was for the future of their lives through education, employment, and building a career, and having all the other things that everybody else just takes for granted, living independently, owning a house or a property or whatever it might be that people want. So we did a lot of that. Prior to that, I spent a good time at a spinal injuries charity called Aspire, where I headed up their training and IT program on a national basis. And now we're going really back into the past, where I started my career when I was doing my degree in business. I was working for a local council, did my kind of 5 years while I was studying, and never looked back when I came into this sector, really.
It's funny, isn't it, how... Because I did, anyway, but for others watching, I did economics and marketing at uni. You did business, and then I got my first job. I wasn't looking to go into disability or inclusion, but I was looking for a job, and Scope were looking to proactively employ more disabled people to have 20% of the workforce reflecting 20% of society with a disability. And like you, just never look back. It just sucks you in, and there's so much wrong in the world in a way to solve, or so much to do. That's a bit loaded, so much wrong in the world, but you know what I mean.
In terms of equality, isn't it? It's about equality, making sure that we all have the same opportunities, the same crack at doing things.
Exactly.
And like you, I did my business degree. I thought I was going to end up in banking. Which is where my father was. My dad was in banking, so that was kind of one of the thoughts I had. I remember doing work experience in a bank, didn't enjoy 1 minute of it, so that put an end to that. But it was just by chance. I ended up working for a very small local disabled people-led organisation in Hounslow, again West London, and kind of really never looked back. I just really loved that. And just a little bit about me outside of that. So I am a wheelchair user. And I got polio when I was 3 or 4 years old. And so my life perspective has been as a wheelchair user.
Yeah. I mean, I remember you saying about Hammersmith and Fulham. it was around then we first met. I think we've known each other probably around 10 years now, because I was at Scope when we first met. And it's it's sort of been amazing how, parts of disability inclusion has got better in the 10 years. Some parts have got worse, some's the same. And obviously at the minute, it's the whole world is upside down to a degree, whether you're disabled or not. But
I think in that time, there's been a real emergence of, this kind of things that you're doing around how the social media and the digital platforms have really established themselves as a new avenue of getting the message out there about kind of articulating what the experiences are, but also just networking and connecting with each other. I mean, this feels like a big experiment, doesn't it? What for many disabled people is a bit of a reality about being isolated and not being able to be outdoors and independent, but using digital tech to provide that.
I think that's probably it, because there's so many things I want to talk to you about today, Cam. I hope we're going to have enough time. I'm very excited to chat with you about all these things. So, I mean, I suppose it'd be good to get a bit of so what is DR UK? What's the sort of background? I think that would be great to frame it. And then, I think we'll definitely tackle where we're at the moment with COVID-19 as well.
Sure. So Disability Rights UK, for people maybe don't know some of the history of it, came into being in around 2012, actually around the Paralympics, kind of in London. And it came out of the merger of 3 other national organizations. And those were Radar, which is often best known for the radar key, the toilet key.
I've got one myself.
Of course, they did a lot more than that, but that was one of the things that they've historically been remembered for. Disability Alliance, which was around campaigning for that kind of benefits system, making sure that it was a fair system for all disabled people. And then National Centre for Independent Living, which is all behind the whole notion of what independent living is and personalization and being in control of what we wanted. So those 3 organizations merged to form Disability Rights UK in 2012. And a lot of those 3 organizations' DNA still exists in our organization. So we still provide the key for the toilets, accessible toilets, the radar key. We still promote and sell that and provide that to people. We produce the Disability Rights Handbook, which is effectively the guide you need to understand what your entitlements are under equalities legislation, but also fundamentally around the benefit system. So that we still provide that. And that resource is used by kind of thousands of advisors around up and down the country. So people in CAB, for example, or other advice centres who are working with disabled people to advise them on their rights around the benefit system. So they buy them, but individuals can buy that book as well from us. Then we have something called the Leadership Academy, which is about disabled people who are already in work, but feel that for whatever reason, they've kind of got to a point where they've hit this kind of ceiling in their career and really want to make a shift change in whether it might be with the same employer or a fundamentally different direction. We deliver the leadership program. Other programs where we're engaging directly with disabled people and our organizations are things like our Get Yourself Active program. There's lots of stats about how active or inactive lives disabled people lead. And it's often not because we don't want to, it's often because for all sorts of reasons, there are so many barriers in our way to participating in activity, sport, leisure opportunities, that actually for a lot of disabled people, you just don't have access to those activities. So our Get Yourself Active program is all about what are the barriers and how do we overcome them. So we've been doing that for a number of years, and there's lots of resource on our website that people can look at, and that work is ongoing. So we do provide direct services like that, but fundamentally what Disability Rights UK is about being the voice of disabled people to fundamentally change the legislation and the equalities landscape in our country, so that irrespective of your background, wherever you live in the country, that you have fundamental rights to live independently, but also your rights just generally across all aspects of your life, and that you have equal access to everything as everybody else. We're a long way away from it, but it needs us to be engaging with government, with ministers, with policymakers, but also with activists and disabled people in the country to understand what's going on and translating that into what are some of the policy asks. So we play a large role in doing that function, really. And I'd say that's the core of what we're about. It's about listening to what's going on through individual disabled people, but our organizations, and then saying, okay, what are the policy and issues that are emerging out of that? And how do we then pull the right levers to try and affect change? It's not easy because, you know, as I'm sure you know, when you're trying to change the minds of government or ministers, that's challenging, that's difficult, because, you know, governments have their own ideology about what their beliefs are, and what you're trying to do is often challenge that and work to change their minds and get them to understand. So we do, that's a big part of our work. In addition to that, obviously, how do we engage with disabled people? We have individual members. So any of your viewers and listeners can become members of DRUK, and we will then engage with them. We have organizations that are members of DRUK. So all of those act as our voice. We run a number of helplines.
Would you say that, sorry to interrupt, Cam, just the organizations, are they very much DPOs?
Yeah, so all of our kind of members who become members of our organization are disabled people-led organizations. So there'll be often local user-led organizations of disabled people dotted throughout the country, because that's who we are. We are a disabled people-led organization, and so our members are also those as well. Yeah. I was just going to go on. Sorry, go on.
Well, just on that note, just to say, for people that, so DPO is Disabled People's Organisation, just in terms of acronyms.
Yeah.
I know why, you know why, but for people that are maybe not as sure, why is user-led important? And some might think that it's a given that disabled people would run it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and it's not. And so why is it? I think the importance is really because in order to truly understand what life is like for yourself, or for others, the only way you can really know that is if you've lived it. If you've lived that life and you've experienced the barriers, the discrimination, the inequality, you are really best placed to say this is what the issues are and this is what needs to change. I think it's a bit like me trying to understand, kind of talk for blind people. I have an understanding from all the years of work I've done, but actually I don't live my life that way, which is why it's really important that user-led, disabled people-led organizations have that range of expertise of our lived experience, the day-to-day discrimination and barriers that we face, because that's what drives, therefore, what we do. And that's really, really important. And we distinct between disabled people-led organizations like DRUK, but also local DPOs, lots of acronyms, I know, but then you've got what are often regarded as disability charities. And I would say organizations like Scope you mentioned, Leonard Cheshire, those kind of big organizations, they are disability organizations, so they will often have disabled people employed more than, you know, well, in fact, they do have disabled people working for them, but often our criteria for a DPO is that the majority of your board members are disabled people, and that your senior staff and your majority of your staff are disabled people. So
yeah, and on a lower scale, that's the kind of stuff that Caroline Casey and Valuable 500 is saying to businesses, that, you know, why are there not more disabled CEOs and CMOs and CFOs, basically all the chief executive and chief financial officers, etc., but also board level. You know, where is that representation of disabled people on Amazon's board? You know.
No, absolutely, it's really true, isn't it? Because how otherwise, I tell you how I describe it when I deliver training and I talk to kind of you know, senior staff in businesses. I often talk to them about saying, imagine if you had a group that was looking at issues to do that were impacting on women, or BAME, so Black and Ethnic Minority groups. For the women's group, it would just be fundamentally wrong if it was managed and run by men, because it just, you know, you just get that a group that's about issues that relate to the impact and the inequality women experience should be run by women, because they're the people who experience it and know the issues really well.
Yeah.
It's not to say that men shouldn't be involved, but fundamentally in control should be that group.
Well,
it's no different.
Toby Milden spoke about inclusive growth, and it was that there's a risk in some businesses that if you are white, middle-aged male, you do feel very scared and threatened of the agenda, and inclusion goes both ways. So it's like it's that in the end there's a representation. So if there's 20% of the population has a disability, then you'd reflect that in media, in business, in policy making, and therefore if there are whatever the percent of white middle-aged males, then it's that there's still a place for that, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's no different in our world.
Yeah, totally. So what Chris has just asked about funding, because you've been talking about members. Is DRUK funded by its members?
So a really good question. So no, the bulk of our funding comes from where we make applications to grants from funders like Trust for London, Esme Fairbairn, all the big kind of trusts and foundations that exist. So we employ someone internally, someone who's really good at helping to articulate the issues in funding applications to those funders. We have we kind of don't get grant funding from government or anything. We have a contract where we deliver disability student helplines, which are funded by the Department of Education. And then we, of course, will do fundraising. So things like having runners in the London Marathon, things like that. But another bulk of our money comes from, we sell the Disability Rights Handbook, the radar keys. We do lots of training and consultancy within the private sector. So companies will ring us to talk to us about how can they be more confident, better employers for disabled people, both getting new disabled people in, but actually supporting their staff teams who are already there to be a more inclusive and more confident place to work. So that generates a lot of income for us. Members do pay, there's a small amount that individual members will pay. And currently that's set at it's $750 a year to join, but we are currently talking about how we might change some of that structure. And then disabled people's organizations pay around a small amount as well, about £50.
Yeah.
But the bulk of our money, the bulk of our money comes from other sources.
Great. And one more thing, I know I've stopped your thought process of the different services, but Julie on LinkedIn, because it's back to our point about representation. I think it's maybe one, if you go on the LinkedIn feed afterwards, anytime later, you can pick it up a bit more with Julie, but she's got just a question around representation of disabled BAME groups, so and within DRUK. But I guess it's that trying to have that representation at all levels, including DRUK, but then sort of how you can cover all the groups is easier said than done, I'm sure, at times.
It is, but it's something that we're really aware of. And certainly when I arrived at DRUK in 2017, I was acutely aware that we as ourselves had to be more representative of the communities that we operate in. So for the last 2 years, we've been working on a program to start at the top, really, to make sure that our board starts off being more reflective. And we've had some successes of being able to encourage more people from different cultural backgrounds to join. So I'm pleased that we've made that shift already. And then kind of being from that community myself, I'm using that kind of hook really to engage with other organizations from different cultures to make sure that we are at least talking to, understanding some of the issues. When I was talking about the range of things that we do, we're making sure that through those things we're engaging with a wider group of communities really, and making sure that. And then of course there's just the one about making sure that more disabled people from different cultural backgrounds feel that Disability Rights UK is a place that they would want to work. And I think that's it's one of those things that I think you can't just flip a switch and say that's going to happen overnight. I think there's lots of things you do. So one of it is around changing our board makeup. So our board's got to be representative, and we've made some shifts on that, which is really good, about us engaging with organizations of disabled people from different cultural backgrounds is really important, because then we start to engage with what their unique issues are and bringing them into Disability Rights UK. Yeah. And then it's about, once you started to do that and you get to be known more in those communities, when you're looking for new employees, you would then start to hope that by making those connections, more people from those communities would start to know about it. Yeah. So yeah, it's really good point, and something that certainly I and our board have been acutely aware of.
Yeah, I'm sure. So I don't know if you can remember what that thought was going to be. We've gone off on a few tangents, but
that's fine. No, I was just going on to say, so other ways we listen to disabled people is we have a number of helplines that we run. So we have a independent living helpline, which is a great member of staff called Banan, who runs that for us. And she is someone who herself is in receipt of personal budget and employs her own support staff team. And so again, it's that lived experience. So that helpline, when someone rings and says to her, I have an issue with my local authority, I'm having a review about my support package, or my package has been reduced, how do I challenge that? You've got someone who's probably done it herself in the past and can really talk from a lived experience, but then also has great knowledge about the legislation and the guidance that local authorities are supposed to be following, can so really advise people. So we have the independent living helpline. We have a helpline aimed at students who are going into further education, and that's Rundit, who's been doing this work for many years. And again, students can ring up and ask about maybe they're experiencing inaccessible learning materials, or it could be that actually the process of joining a college has presented lots of barriers. Again, we can support people on that. Yeah. And then we have what's called a second tier helpline. And what that means is that this helpline is aimed at other advisors rather than individual disabled people themselves. And this is around the welfare benefits. So if a local advisor working with a client, a disabled person, has a particularly complicated case or issue, that member of staff can ring us, and our welfare advisor Ken will then get back to them with kind of the answers they need. And all of those things are where we pick up what's going on for disabled people. So those feed us that intelligence that we use. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for sharing. I could go on for ages, but I don't want to use all the time. Yeah, well, I mean, I think as we said, there's a lot of issues to overcome. There's a lot to do, and you know that's why there's a lot of services that have to happen. Yeah. So bringing it into a bit more the current COVID-19. I mean, we've covered quite a lot of what the broader issues are for disabled people, particularly those that are classed under the inverted commas vulnerable group. You know, around accessing food, around those that employ their own care team. Like it's very personal experience for me there, and the access to the PPE equipment. So are there any other things that you'd want to add to that? And also, how are DRUK addressing even the ones I've just mentioned as well? Yeah, so God, last kind of 6 weeks, 7 weeks, kind of lost track of what week we're in now. It's it kind of blends into one into the other. I think it's been an incredibly busy period for our policy team. It kind of started off with just, you know, when the lockdown happened, and then the Coronavirus Act was passed. Since then, it's been us trying to keep up with, one, what's government saying, what are they announcing, what are the bits of legislation that they're putting out, and the guidance that is attached to that in all aspects of our lives. Making sense of that, understanding where the gaps and problems are, and then kind of raising some challenges. And one of our key things is around keeping disabled people informed of what's going on. So the first thing we did immediately was we set up a page on the coronavirus on our website, which we're trying to keep up to date with the latest information, with anything that we're doing in terms of action that we're taking, where we've written to organizations or individuals, but also as facts are emerging, we're keeping that up to date. Then we traditionally, for those of your kind of viewers who are members or have ever signed up to receive our newsletter, we would send that out weekly.
Yeah,
we've now changed that to more than once a week, so that you may get up to 3 newsletters a week, just because of the volume of information that we want to get out. So that's our kind of role in understanding what's going on, and then disseminating as much of that information as quickly as possible to people who need it. So
and in a digestible way as well, right? The sort of taking government speak into lay people speak sometimes.
Yeah, trying to put it in plain English. You know, you sit and try and read a piece of legislation or guidance, you can just get completely lost in what is it actually trying to do and what is it trying to say. And of course, we then work with other organizations like Liberty, but also other lawyers. I think you may have had Chris Fry on your program. So, you know, we were working with Chris and other solicitors who are working in this field, for them to tell us about what does the law say and what does it actually mean in translation in everyday speak. So absolutely trying to translate that into language that most of us just understand. So that's really important. We're then keeping up our fact sheets on our website. We've got loads of fact sheets, and there are some specific ones around COVID-19, and for example, education at the moment is the one we just recently updated. So that's one thing that we've been doing. And then of course, it's all the things that you've probably already covered on your program so far. So the food one, for example, you know, the government's response was that they were going to provide food parcels to people on this shielding list. But you know, the issue we have with all of this is that it's starting to categorize people into these categories. Well, you're shielded, so you'll get some support, but actually it misses out millions of other disabled people who, for all sorts of reasons, rely on online shopping, who now suddenly have no access to food. So I've got a good friend who I won't name, but they contacted me about someone who's a wheelchair user, spinal cord injury, lives on their own, has no family around them, but isn't on the shielded list, but says, I can't get any food. I've literally got 2 days of food left. I've been sat on, you know, a website trying to get a delivery slot. This is just not acceptable. Who do I go and talk to? And when they spoke to their GP, the GP's response was, well, because you're not on the shielded list, I can't really add you. And actually, you have to ask yourself the question: under the Equality Act, supermarkets are businesses, and they have to provide adjustments for disabled people, for all of us, we're their customers. And what seems to have happened is that supermarkets are talking to government, DEFRA.
Just not disabled people.
And what we're trying to say is fine, you're talking to DEFRA, but actually, we as disabled people, you should be talking to us as your customers about what adjustments we need. And when the online system isn't working, so how can, I mean, my view is, if you remember when there was all the panic buying, supermarkets got together very quickly and put out a joint statement to say that we're all working together on this, and we're all united that certain items you can only buy 2 of at any time. So there's a run on toilet rolls for some reason. I never understood that.
I never got
that. But when it comes to now providing online booking slots, I wonder if they've even thought about collaborating on that and saying, if we pool all of our resource capacity to deliver food, could we do an online system that you just book a slot, and whether it's with Sainsbury's or Tesco's or Asda, it doesn't really matter. You pick what you want and someone delivers it to you. I don't know if that's been thought about, but why not at this point? It's kind of not good enough to say we'll only do what the government says. So there's some of the challenges. So in order to address that, we wrote to the chief exec of every single supermarket, asking them what their plans were, stating what we wanted, and all of this stuff is on our website. People can see all this. And what's been really disappointing, that I think only about 3 or 4 ever actually bothered to reply to us. The rest have just ignored the request. But we're then working with others, so whether it's lawyers or Liberty or other organizations around these sorts of issues. So that was the food one, and this is an ongoing issue. It still hasn't been resolved.
Yeah.
And who knows how long the current world we live in is going to continue, and we're talking about peaks and troughs happening over the next year, and we can't keep repeating this sort of problem. So that was one area. Then on kind of health and social care, which of course are really, really important areas, working with people like Jane Campbell and others, it was really about the kind of lack of guidance and effectively the forgotten individuals who receive a personal budget and employ their own care team, support team. I think, Martin, you said you employ your own team.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm on direct payment.
And just absolute lack of guidance. All of the guidance around PPE and furloughing and all of those things were targeting providers, so people, kind of the care providers, but completely missed the 70,000 plus individuals who are using the system that you are. And so we were getting people coming to us saying, I'm really worried about if I need to isolate, what do I do? Or if my staff start to self-isolate, where do I get cover for that? And also about, could you use your budget more flexibly? So your direct payment support budget that you get, is it possible to use it more flexibly? So those kind of issues we've been picking up on as well. You would have heard the story about the do not resuscitate notices that were going to people. We kind of jumped on that really quickly, and again on our website you can see a letter that Neil Crowther, who I think, have you had him on?
No, I'd like to get on.
So it'd be good to get Neil on. He helped us, or he wrote kind of an open statement about what the NHS is and kind of intrinsically what the core values of the NHS are, and that the value of who does and doesn't receive treatment is not about whether you're disabled or not. The value judgment is in the wrong place, and that got over 2,000 people signing that letter very quickly literally over a weekend that happened. The NHS then put out a statement and said, absolutely, this is not something that should be happening. The health minister also said that in one of his briefings. But despite that, the following weeks, we still heard of more people being asked to have that conversation of do not resuscitate. So we've kind of been lobbying and campaigning on that and trying to talk to the right people about what's going on there. And that kind of, what we're hearing is people saying that they're really fearful of catching the virus. I mean, everyone is fearful of catching it anyway, but actually as a disabled person, I'm more worried now, because what does it mean once I end up in hospital? Am I going to be afforded the same treatment and access to healthcare that someone else might be, but they're not a disabled person? That's a huge fear. That's a real worry. I mean, I worry about that. Yeah, absolutely. And so, we picked up those kind of issues as well. I noticed some comments coming up. I didn't quite catch them.
Yeah, so Ross was saying he thinks some info's coming. We just had some. So Ross is a friend and we live in Cambridgeshire. We both had a letter through this week, but he said 7 weeks, 7 weeks too late, really. So that was what Ross was saying. Paul was saying about, been mentioned a number of times about the volunteers. There was that whole thing in the news, how many people signed up as volunteers, but they've not really been allocated any tasks, which could be around the deliveries. And Ross was saying about if we were customers in the private sector, it'd be different, but local social services have no commercial acumen. Any thoughts on those?
Yeah, so in terms of the shopping one and in terms of volunteers, actually after I finish this meeting, this session with you, Martin, I'm going on to a conversation exactly about food supply that's being hosted by Devon. So what I can do certainly is maybe come back after that meeting and respond to some of the questions. If people are happy if you'd like me to do that, I'm really happy to do it on LinkedIn.
Yeah, the ones I can show on the screen are from Facebook, and then normally YouTube and Twitter gets more on the replay. But then LinkedIn and Facebook is where there's been a lot of questions and activities. Absolutely, yeah. Feel free to go back in. Yeah, I mean, I think, when we spoke before we went live, there's one thing I'm very keen to look around digital activism, and also the sort of, I guess more we'll start with this one, but I just want to make sure we got time for both how we come out as we come out of COVID-19. There's every guest has had some sort of positive silver linings, optimism thoughts as well. But I think equally there are undoubtedly further worries and issues as we come out of lockdown and, even beyond COVID-19, like getting the Care Act put in. So yeah, just a couple of thoughts on as we come out of COVID-19, and then we'll talk about social media.
Sure. So I mean, I think in terms of silver linings for me, one of what it's shown, certainly in the realms of kind of employment, what it's shown is that remote working works, and kind of adjusting to different ways of working can and does work, and a lot of businesses can do it. So I would hope that as we come out of this, one of the lessons learned is actually, if someone is working for your organization or applies to work with you, that if the adjustments and reasonable adjustments that someone requests or wanting to work remotely would just be something that we take for granted now, that actually this is just part of how we do things.
I felt less pressure. Like I sometimes went to meetings because it was culturally expected, and I knew I'd be knackered, and the next day I wouldn't be as productive, and in the winter I might even get a bit under par health-wise, but I do it because that was what you're meant to do to fit in. Whereas I'm thriving at home because I'm getting so much done without using up energy.
Absolutely. And there's the whole energy and kind of fatigue aspect, isn't there, of having to go and travel and get on public transport or whichever method people choose.
On productivity, from a business perspective, it's productivity you want, isn't it?
Yeah, and so now, I used to travel by a minicab for an hour and 10 minutes each way. I'm saving, 2 hours, 20 minutes just in that, let alone before you even think about traveling to meetings. So you're getting through a lot more work. But actually, the other thing is you can just be more flexible about how you use your hours and how you... I've always said, for a lot of organizations and businesses, really it should be about your productivity and outcomes. So what is the work that you've got to do?
Exactly.
And are you doing it by the deadlines that have been set? It doesn't really matter that you were at your desk from 9 till 5, really. It's about what works for you and how your health condition or fluctuating energy levels mean the hours that you work and different times of the day. So I think there's a lot to be learned from that, and I really hope that that's something we can work with. The other silver lining I found personally was I love the theatre and opera and all those kind of things.
Suddenly,
it's all being live streamed. And kind of now I think, wow, again, I do like going to in person.
That's an important point, isn't it? Like, we don't want there to be some you can just work at home and watch the theatre at home, and we won't adapt the London Underground. It's choice, isn't it? It's opportunity. Yeah,
it's about offering both.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there'll be a group of people who can't, and it's not just about for disabled people, but can you imagine how many people are watching the National Theatre live around the country for whom getting to London is not that feasible?
Yeah, if you live in Newcastle or Cornwall or whatever.
That's right. So that's some of the kind of silver lining. I'm sure there are lots of others that some of your viewers will have in mind as well. And I think the things we need to keep an eye on. So the Coronavirus Act currently lasts for 2 years. And I think 7 local authorities have now enacted the easement option. And what that basically means is that the local authorities' obligation under the Care Act, in those local authorities that are enacting, they effectively don't have to follow. That's a real worry. So one of the things we did is we wrote to every single chief exec of all the local authorities in the UK, in England, to raise our concerns right when the Coronavirus Act was passed, even before anyone enacted it. We've written to everybody through what's called the Association of Directors of Social Services, ADAS. Once the local authorities announced it, we wrote to all of them, and Liberty have as well. And actually just today in the Guardian news online and in the paper tomorrow is an article specifically about that Liberty and ourselves have contribute to. It's around. I can send you a link and you can post it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
So we really need to keep an eye on making sure that those local authorities who have enacted that don't now use it as a reason to say, well, okay, you managed with the reduced support or the reduced level of service we were doing, and that this is just going to become the norm, because it is fundamentally removing the very kind of support network, the rights that people have, that we have, and we need to keep an eye on that to make sure that's reversed as soon as possible. We questioned why it needed to be for 2 years as well. That's been a real worry for us. The only adjustment that we got through our lobbying and others was that the government would review the act 6 months in. That's only a review. That's not that they would end that. So real kind of a concern around that. The other things are around looks like we're heading into a form of recession. I've heard this morning on the radio it's likely to be the deepest one that we've known, and there will be more unemployment. And I think in scenarios like that, as I'm sure you know, as disabled people, we get put right at the bottom. And so I want to work to make sure that our asset that we bring as disabled people, we really promote that to businesses to say, right now, when you need people with a diverse range of skills and experiences in your business, disabled people are, and you should be seriously looking at employing disabled people. So that's a concern about what the impact will be for us as disabled people. So we need to keep an eye on that. And of course, then, depending on how long this phase of returning to whatever the new normality might look like, however long that's going to last, they're talking about peaks and troughs in the virus, and making sure that what we've learned and what hasn't worked this time isn't just repeated endlessly. It'd be just kind of unacceptable if we end up in the autumn with another peak and we have the same issues happening again, in terms of access to food and access to healthcare, access to PPE equipment, all those kind of issues that I'm sure you're well aware of and your viewers have been hearing on.
Yeah, thank you for that. All makes a lot of sense. I mean, I say when I mentioned social media for our final topic of discussion, in a way, it's not about social media. It's more about making change. And so, if you want a government to change a policy, maybe it's some more thoughts actually on how DRUK are trying to lobby and make a difference in that area. And I guess just bigger picture, like how do you think, looking at history of civil rights, the way disabled people won rights sort of 30 years ago when there wasn't social media, we do have different tools, but are they impactful and successful when actually looking to make change in what's probably still an older democrat? Like we still vote in person, don't we? We don't do anything digitally. So just a few of your thoughts around that topic would be really interesting.
Yeah, I think really interesting point. And I mean, 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have the kind of influencers like yourself, Martin, who were incredibly well known, speaking on really important topics, and galvanizing, thousands of people, probably tens of thousands and more around the country behind issues. I think that what it's allowed us to do and what the digital platforms offer is that connectedness across geographical big distances, whereas before, it would have meant that you either had to get yourself somewhere in order to campaign and lobby. And of course, that was incredibly powerful, wasn't it? And if you imagine some of the images of when the Disability Discrimination Act was being campaigned for by disabled people asking for rights and equality, those memorable images of being chained to trains and buses and railings and down at Parliament. I think there's a need for that to continue, because that's incredibly powerful when you see hundreds of people gathered about an issue, or thousands. So, the last big campaign was the hardest hit march in London. when thousands of people turned up. That's incredibly powerful in raising really the issue on a mass scale in the media and in the general public's view. But I think social media offers, certainly organisations like us at DRUK, I think it would be true to say we need to get better at it. But we need to use it.
Just ask, what is DRUK's preferred social media platform? Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Insta, Snapchat, Tinder. Or Tinder?
yeah, I hadn't considered Tinder or Snapchat, but so for example, we've got just over 50,000 followers on our Twitter. So that's a big group of people who we can be talking, engaging with, and we do. But I think we can always do better. So I think what this has offered us is, how do we use these platforms for a common purpose? But internally, we're talking about creating this mass movement of people. But we can't do that on our own. I know that. We need to work with people like yourself and others, and some of your listeners and viewers and people who follow you, to say, what are our common aims and objectives? What is it around equality in our lives that we all want, that we agree on? And how can we make our voice just amplify it hundreds and thousands of times, so that when I go and talk to a minister, or when I go and sit at a round table with government, that I'm not speaking on my personal behalf with just DRUK. What I'm saying is, I have got thousands of people who are saying this to us. This is impacting on their lives. This is not the right way to do it. Here's the solution, or here's what we want. That's powerful, because ultimately what it comes down to is, politicians want to remain in office, and we're their voters. And if we can galvanize as that mass movement, I accept that even within our community there are differing opinions, but I think there are lots of things that we're unified on. And so using
Campbell talked about that last week, that we have to unify the community publicly, even if behind closed doors there's some disagreements and tensions about what are the overriding things to own. She cited that happened in the 80s. That it wasn't all plain sailing behind closed doors, but you have to have that unified voice. And I've done a lot around the Purple Pound, and for businesses, we are consumers. And when you look at the number of disabled consumers and the value of that in spending power, that's the language that businesses start to engage with. And as you say, with politicians and politics, it's votes. So I suppose one thought jumped in mind when you're talking around that is, how can we look to use single issue campaigns for change versus getting a party to want the disabled vote as a way of being in power? They overlap, don't they? A manifesto will talk about different parts of society, of which single issues would potentially be in a manifesto. But I just feel like we've always done it as disabled people on just issues based. But if a party said, right, we're going for the disability vote, that could swing an election when you look at the numbers. Why don't they do that? Why do you think they don't do that?
Gosh, that's a good question. It's a big question. Why don't they do that? I think it's that old thing, isn't it, about the narrative about disabled people is I would say quite negative. So the narrative about our lives is very much either in receipt of kind of taxpayer funded support, and that's portrayed as a very negative thing in the media by politicians and by others. And then you've got on the other end of that spectrum is kind of the Paralympians, the superhuman type individual. There's no narrative about the everyday disabled person. I would regard myself as an ordinary individual. I'm not special in any way. I live my life. I'm married. I have a house, and I go to work, and I love doing what I do. I don't aspire to be a Paralympian. I play a bit of sport, but that's more for interest and health. There's just no narrative about the contributions. There is some, but not in the general public's eye. The narrative doesn't exist about the contribution we make as disabled people.
So that's almost the downside of social media, maybe, is that, yes, we have a voice and a platform to share our stories and experiences, but you're going to tend to get the echo chamber, that the people that are more engaged already probably understand it, whereas the people you want to influence and educate are not going to be reading my book.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things that I want to do within DRUK is, people expect to see us commenting in the Guardian. They kind of just expect that. But what they don't expect is us in the Financial Times, which we have been now. They don't expect us in the Times. They don't expect us in those audiences, because that's actually the audience we need to shift. Shift their thinking. So the whole purpose of doing the work with the Financial Times is because the people who read it, people in finance, wealthy people, whoever it might be, people in those industries, we want to be talking to them to say, what are you doing and what should you be doing, and what's the contribution we already make, what we could make. So I think bringing our narrative to new audiences is really important. And for organizations like ours and others, it's about engaging with not just the usual organizations that we should be, but, for example, I often talk about in our organization, I often say we should connect with Mumsnet, because that's a very powerful lobby group. But there'll be lots of things that parents experience that we as disabled people experience, but there will be disabled parents, there will be parents of disabled children. So let's talk and see where we've got overlaps and commonality of what we want, and kind of galvanize that support behind the movement that we all create. So what I'd be saying to all of your viewers and anyone who comments is, join us. Just join DRUK, become a member, and engage with us. We're not interested in taking things on ourselves. We're about collaborating, working together to a common world of inclusion that we want, really.
Yeah, no, very well said. I'm mindful of the time. I think we're almost at the end. That's a perfect area to finish. I think for me, that, because we spoke yesterday and a few times the last couple of weeks about media representation and narrative, and everything you've said was definitely echoed before. But what I really saw there more than ever is that, so it's almost a campaign to get this everyday story of disabled people in the mainstream media. And then as a result, you would have businesses and politicians that would more willingly engage disabled people the way we want to be engaged, not in this archaic sort of the negative, like you say, all the stuff we've talked about. But yeah, I think there's maybe a campaign there, Cam, about changing the narrative in mainstream media.
Well, it's something we've been talking about internally, and as we get our heads around what that might look like. So this year we'll be launching our new priorities, and one of the priorities is around this.
Right.
Is narrative change, but we want to do it in partnership with others. We can't do it on our own.
Yeah, of course, it has to be collaboration. Yeah.
And it's not something that we want to own.
No.
It's all of ours, and so actually we should work on it together.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, it's really good to catch up. It's been a while, since we actually caught up on the phone, but it's quite nice to do it in a forum where everybody else can share their experiences and questions as well. As Cam said, everyone, if you any issues, get in touch with DRUK, because there may be some answers already, but it may just lend weight to the campaigning and the when Cam's in the room with politicians and MPs, etc. It just gives more insights into what we're all feeling and getting on with. And do consider joining DRUK as a member as well. Brilliant. Thank you, Martin. Nice one. Well, everyone, have a lovely weekend, lovely long weekend. I'll be back Monday for the next episode. And thanks again, Cam. Pleasure. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.